Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Today is an episode really focused on a question that we hear so often. Yoga teachers ask us over and over again about teaching private yoga. So today's episode, you get to meet Mary, who is supporting her family right now with her income from her private yoga career. Also, I need to tell you that we have a live call with Mary coming up where you can ask her questions beyond today's interview. So let's say you're listening and then you think, oh, what about this or what about that? This call is for members of Pelvic Health Professionals. So members, you get this included in your membership, but anyone else can also join us for this call, and that gives you access also to everything else within our membership. You can decide to sign up just for the month, or you can stay as long as you'd like. Join us for this call and many others over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. In case you're a brand new listener, let me introduce myself and the podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and this podcast is being recorded on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, who were here on Turtle Island long before my settler ancestors arrived. It's really important to me that I continue to learn how to support all of the life here on this land and on all of the land on the earth, really, and to continue to connect to nature, including all living things. This is really part of my learning, and it comes into my work and my practice as a yoga teacher as well. So I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, I'm a mom of 3, I'm an entrepreneur, and I would say I'm a forever student who really has so many questions. That's why podcasting is a good fit. I love that we can hang out together, learn from amazing yoga teachers from around the world. So this podcast really was made for you, the yoga teacher, because I remember how it felt to leave my very first yoga teacher training, step out into the world as a yoga teacher. And I knew that what would have helped me in those days is a place where I could connect to other yoga teachers, to a supportive community, to ideas and information. And that's where the podcast was born. And also, we have a Facebook group for yoga teachers. So you can find that if you head over to our website, theconnectedyogateacher.com. There's an amazing group there of yoga teachers who will jump in and answer your questions. We have tens of thousands of yoga teachers now from around the world as part of that group. If you are a returning listener, thank you again for hanging out. Today's episode is powered by OfferingTree. I use and love this software in my own business because it automates everything from bookings, payments, Zoom links, reminders, and so much more. And we have a very special podcast listener discount code for you over at OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Today's episode is also brought to you by Pelvic Health Professionals. So this is the other hat that I wear because I love talking about pelvic health. And I see so many parallels of how yoga can help with our pelvic health. Now, I want to tell you that we have a yoga series coming up with Kathleen Pratt, who is a social worker and yoga teacher who specializes in pelvic health, trauma, pain, and the nervous system. Recently, I did a story on my Instagram asking people how they're doing right now, and I got so many answers back of people saying like they're very stressed out, they're at their limit, that their nervous systems are not doing well. Some people were saying that their immune system is not doing well, and I don't know if you can hear it, but I am fighting off a cold right now, and I get it. I get that this has been a stressful time over the last 4 years. Like we all collectively went through this pandemic together, and our yoga students are feeling the same. And so here's a yoga series, and I'll let Kathleen tell you about it in a moment. But this yoga series is not only for your own nervous system, but it's also so that you can support your yoga students right now. This series is made up of 6 classes. You get to be the student, be in your body with each and every pose and breath and meditation, mindfulness. Every moment you get to be the student. And that way you can see what it feels like and decide what you'd like to share with your students from this series. We love it when you sign up as the student and then take it out into the world and share it. I'll let Kathleen also tell you about the yoga series.
This is Kathleen Pratt, and I'm thrilled to be collaborating with Pelvic Health Professionals in the upcoming 6-week online series, Nourish Your Nervous System. Our nervous systems are taxed by multiple stressors in our personal lives, communities, and planet. Over time, chronic stress can hurt our mental and physical health and well-being. Nourish Your Nervous System is an experiential dive into mind-body practices that not only reduce stress but help restore balance in the nervous system. Throughout the program, I will be sharing the science behind why these practices work. Simple and gentle movement, breathwork, and mindfulness practices have helped me and my clients find new and effective ways to reduce anxiety, pain, tension, insomnia, and other symptoms of excess stress. I invite you to join me in this journey starting March the 5th.
Visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com to sign up for this yoga series. Alrighty, let's get into today's episode. So teaching private yoga is a topic, like I said, that comes up all the time, both in my conversations with yoga teachers and also in our private Facebook group. So as I said before, join that group if you're not already a part of the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. If you head over to our website, you can find the join button there. And when you get into the Facebook group, you can also search for any topic in there because we have had years of topics, like over 7 years. And the questions that yoga teachers often share in there about private yoga are like, how do I find private yoga students? Or how do I retain my private yoga students? Or what makes a good private lesson different from a group class? Or how do you make sure your private students are getting what they need? Or how do you teach good private lessons online? And we've covered a lot of these questions before on the podcast. So in episode 206, we talked to Megan Spears about getting more private yoga clients. In episode 132, I did an on-air consultation call with Amanda Mays, where we talked about marketing to increase private bookings. Episode 131, I shared how I structure my private yoga sessions with people. In episode 130, Emily Sussel talked to us about making a profit teaching private yoga. In episode 120, Yale Oppenheim shared with us about teaching private yoga online. In episode 81, now we're going way back, I did another consultation call with Stephanie Brunson, who wanted to learn how to set things up to teach private yoga. And then way back in the beginning, episode 14, Kate Cannell-Potts shared with us about building a private yoga business. So all of the links for those past episodes on private yoga will be in our show notes. So that's if you have a listen to this one today and you really want to dive in and learn more about teaching private yoga. But as I said, you can also join the call with Mary and get your questions answered. So if you don't have time to listen to a whole pile of episodes and you just have one quick question, I'd say jump on that call with us with Mary. And all of those links in our show notes, that can be found over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/363. But today's episode, as I said, I have a really great guest on the show with me talking about building a full-time yoga career with private clients. Mary Reddinger is a full-time yoga teacher and mother of 2 boys, ages 9 and 5. And you'll hear in our conversation how Mary has practiced yoga on and off for many years, but really integrated it into her life after her first pregnancy, when she started really seeing the benefits of yoga. Mary also shares a little about her journey to working with perinatal students. She currently teaches prenatal yoga, postnatal yoga, and private lessons. I love this conversation with Mary because she really talks about how she works with students who would struggle in a group class setting through her private yoga teaching practice and how she's been able to make this her full-time career in the past few years. So let's dive in and meet Mary. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Mary. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Shannon. I am so honored to be here today.
I feel like we know each other and it must be through maybe you were in an online group. How did we first connect? I cannot remember. Or is it just through like Facebook and Instagram?
Well, I've been a part of the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group for a long time. And so I think we had some interactions there. And a couple years ago, we became friends on Instagram. And that's how we started to get to know one another a little better.
So I'm like, I feel like I know you, but it's I think mostly from watching your Instagram videos, where I really got to feel like, oh, have we like done a live call? I know we haven't met in person, but that's the beauty of social media. That's the positive of it.
I know. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell our connected yoga teachers what's the work that you do and who do you do it for?
I am a prenatal, postnatal, and private yoga teacher. And I help students in the birthing community, so prenatal and postnatal students. I also teach private sessions, and my private sessions make up the majority of my work.
Now, do you find that your private sessions go along with that niche of prenatal, postnatal, or is there more of a mix?
It's a mix. A fair amount of my private yoga students do have pelvic floor imbalance, hip imbalance, abdominal muscle imbalance, lower back issues. But then a few of my private students don't really fall into that category. So it's a nice mix.
And how did you build up? How did private yoga students find you and how did you grow that as your main business?
5.5 years ago, when I first became a yoga teacher, actually, even further back than that, while I was in my yoga teacher training, I knew that I wanted to be a yoga teacher. I was not one of those people who thought, oh, maybe I'll be a yoga teacher. I knew I wanted to share this work with other people. And I also knew in a few years, my husband would be back in school. My husband is currently in his PhD and working on becoming a nurse anesthetist. And it's a demanding program, it's 3 years, and he cannot work during that time. And so I knew at some point I would have to support our family teaching yoga. And I did a lot of research on how I could do that. And what I found was a lot of yoga teachers are able to sustain themselves and their families by teaching private yoga lessons. And so I found Francesca Cervero and I studied with her. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that my journey toward becoming a private yoga teacher started in my teacher training. I was already thinking about this. The number one thing I have done to create a full schedule of private students is to tell people that I am a private yoga teacher.
It sounds that sounds like, oh, that's simple, but that is a huge thing that I see yoga teachers not doing.
Exactly. A lot of yoga teachers do not share that private sessions are something they offer. And that is one of the biggest ways I've grown my list of private students is just by sharing in my group classes, sharing on social media, sharing on my email list that that is an offering that I have.
That's fantastic. And shout out to Francesca because she's helped quite a few people build their one on one business. Okay. So, was it a struggle when you left yoga teacher training? Well, let me even back this up. So, in most yoga teacher trainings, we learn how to teach to a group and we focus on that. Was there any challenge for you thinking, okay, now it's kind of scary to teach one on one?
It was scary. But I got better the more I did it. Another thing I did, and I have to credit Francesca because this is something she suggests her students do when they train with her. About a year after I graduated my teacher training, that's when I was actually doing her Science of the Private Lesson training. She suggested offering a large package of private lessons at a deeply discounted rate just to get people on your calendar and get people seeing you on a regular basis, like once a week, twice a week. And so that is something I did. And I got about 8 people on my calendar right away. And I offered, I think, 12 sessions for 50% off. And that really helped build my confidence in offering private sessions and building my skills working with students one on one to get a lot of people on my calendar at once, seeing me weekly. I have to be honest, when I first started teaching, a few months out of my initial teacher training, I booked a few private lessons, but they were mostly one offs. And those were good to do, but they didn't build that skill and those muscles of teaching somebody one on one the same way it did when I was teaching people once a week for a long period of time.
Now, when you marketed those sessions, when you were brand new to it, maybe word of mouth, well, you're brand new as a yoga teacher, and word of mouth maybe wasn't working in your favor. Do you remember what is the best way that you found to book those initial people?
I booked most of those initial people by making a post on my personal Facebook page
Right.
and saying, hey, who's interested? And I got a lot of people who were and who signed up.
That's amazing. That's really great also to get that commitment of a large package of classes, because that's when people see the difference. If they just go to a one-off private session, you know, they're like, cool, I felt relaxed and now, but they can, the more they practice and do yoga, that's a great tip for yoga teachers who are wanting to build that. So then what about keeping them? Like, let's say people finish that 12 class session with you, or now when they currently book, how do you work on retention of people, or do you?
I do. I'll be honest, a- after booking those initial large packages, most of my students finished up with those when the pandemic hit. And at the same time, we moved out of state to a different state. And I didn't retain very many of those students for that reason. I did retain 2 of them who transitioned to working with me online. And now I retain most of my students. Most of my students have been working with me between 1 and 3 years.
That's amazing. What do you think the secret is to that?
Really, the first year of working with a new private student, it's about building your relationship with them and it's about building trust. And so you really have to meet your students where they are and let go of your own agenda. So, an example of that might be a student, and I've had students like this who would benefit from more stillness and relaxation, or you think they might benefit from that. They have a hard time being still. But if they do not want to be still and they have a hard time being still, you're not really meeting them where they are if you're trying to force that on them. And so then you have to step back and think about how you can give them what they're looking for. And perhaps find ways where they can find stillness in an active practice. I currently have a student who has a very hard time being still, but she can be still when she's working really hard. So, like, dolphin pose is really hard for her. And when she practices dolphin, and this has become something we do once a week when I meet her in her sessions, she'll stay in dolphin for 5, 8 breaths, and she is still, and she is in her body.
That's a great way to build that in.
Yeah. And trusting what they're telling you. I have really found in teaching private students, they will sometimes feel a shape in a way you don't expect. And you have to believe them and then adjust for it if you need to. But trust them. They will trust you if you trust them and trust what they are telling you and what they are experiencing in each shape.
This is so good. I know this so well. I remember like working at the physio office, the physio would say, "Okay, this person needs to learn how to relax." And what they want them to do is like kind of come into a place where they can sit still, maybe a meditation or a breath practice. And this person often is like the opposite of that. You're right. And if I was like, "All right, we're gonna sit and meditate for the hour that we're together," it would be like, "That's it. I'm never coming back."
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you teach online mostly or in person now?
I teach a mix of both. I have 8 students who work with me virtually and exclusively virtually. I have about 6 students who work with me in person. And of those 6, most of them will work with me virtually if for some reason in person is not available. So, like, if one of us has a cold, we really don't want to be together in person and spreading germs. Most of my in person students are really cool at this point with meeting virtually instead of in person. And I have a handful of students who really just want to meet in person. They're not willing to do virtual.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. What makes your private class different? If someone was going to your group class and then they signed up for private sessions, what would be the difference with you?
One of the big differences is it will be more conversational. And we start a private session with checking in. How are you doing today? How's your body feeling? How did you feel after our last session? What did you notice? What do you want to work on today? How's your energy? So we're starting with a conversation. And then during the duration of the class, I'm asking questions. If we start with a breath practice, how did that breath practice feel today? What did you notice when it was over? Um, when we're doing poses, where do you feel this? Do you like this? Do you like this shape?
Right.
And if they do, a nice follow up question to that is, what do you like about it? And then you can learn what they like. And actually, that kind of pulls back into retaining private students. In that first year, I really try to focus on what the student loves. And if there's a certain shape they just really love, we either start with it or we end with it every time, or sometimes both. Sometimes that shape works as both an opening shape and a closing shape. Um, because in that first year, or in those first few sessions, and I talk about the first year because I really think that I consider students new for the first year they're working with me. I'm still really getting to know their bodies and how their bodies respond to movement and breath and meditation. Um, And I want to connect them to their practice. I want them to be excited for showing up to our session and look forward to it. So we have to focus on what they enjoy. And so that's why I ask the follow-up question if they're like, I like this pose, or especially if they say something unprompted, like, oh, I love this. What do you like about it? And if they can tell you, then I go home and I think, okay, what else can give them that sensation
Oh, that's
and
really
that
good.
feeling?
Especially when we all know that feeling of like, oh, I have to like gather my yoga stuff, go to the class, like travel there. I don't know what it's like where you are, but we got 60 centimeters of snow in the last 3 days. Like going out somewhere can be really challenging at different times of the year. Or like, let's say it's summer and you really want to go inside and sit in a yoga studio. So to add in what they love is brilliant. Connected yoga teachers, I have to tell you some very exciting news about OfferingTree. So I'm jumping in here for a moment. And no, this is not about how they help me and many other yoga teachers and studios to create a website, book in their yoga students, automate everything from text and email reminders and Zoom links. This news that I have to tell you is way more personal. So, a huge congratulations to one of the amazing OfferingTree members. Him and his wife just welcomed a healthy baby. I got to see a photo and wow, oh my gosh, so adorable. So, one of the team at OfferingTree now gets what it's like to get very little sleep as a new parent. And I asked this OfferingTree member if it was okay if I shared my excitement in a congratulations here on the podcast instead of our usual ad where I talk about how much I love OfferingTree. So thank you so much for letting me do that. I said that I wasn't going to share names or birth information because this is a global platform that's out there all the time. But I just want to share because I love baby news so much. And I also love the team over at OfferingTree. I love the conversations that I get to have with this amazing team. So if you are a yoga teacher or a studio who needs a way to book your students in, take payments, maybe you even want to create a new or a simpler website, make sure to check out OfferingTree. I have a discount code for you over at offeringtree.com/Shannon that will save you 50% off the first 3 months. Okay, let's get back to the show and back to our conversation with Mary. When you are teaching one-on-one, are you taking notes?
That depends. I have a few different systems and it depends on how we meet. So with my virtual students, I do keep a notebook beside me and take notes because that helps me focus on the session. And on my days where I mostly have virtual students, I'm usually seeing them pretty back to back. So it's a little easier to take notes while we're working together. My students I see in person, I keep notes as voice memos on my phone. And so while I'm traveling to my student who I have next, I pull out my phone and record and I just run over what we worked on that day. If anything worked really well, if we found a unique prop setup that really worked, just anything to note. And then I can replay it when I'm driving to their house the next time I see them.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now you got me thinking. So you go to their house. It's not like they come to your house or your studio or a studio.
Correct. Yes. My students who I see in person, I go to their home to teach them. I do not at this time have the ability to teach students in my home.
Right.
I have 2 kids and we have a small house and I don't have a dedicated space. Although that's something I think about in the future if we ever move to a different house. I think there's some benefits to doing it that way. There's also benefits. A lot of people really love that I come to them, and it makes it easier. They don't have to worry about starting their car and having their mat and
Yeah.
yeah.
So true. Okay, I have to tell you that one time I went to teach yoga at one person's house and they had 20, I'm not joking, like cuckoo clocks that went off every hour. Like 20 clocks made some weird noise right during Shavasana. But see, I really noticed it thinking, this is really distracting. And I remember the student didn't even budge because it was her house. And she was used to that every hour.
Yeah. And we have a beautiful opportunity when we teach one-on-one sessions, especially if we're going to their home or meeting online. Distractions are going to happen, and part of yoga as a practice is noticing what comes up when we are distracted, and then what do we need to do to come back? And so you have this lovely opportunity as a private yoga teacher to model what you do when something comes up. I
So
had a
true.
student for a long time who was a doctor. And one of the reasons private yoga sessions worked well for him was because he couldn't go to studio classes, both because of his schedule and because he could not have his phone with him because he had to take calls. And his phone would ring often in the middle of our sessions, and often he would have to answer it. And so I would sit calmly and patiently and just wait and just model what waiting is like. And something that was really interesting with him as well, when we first started working together, he would get very visibly annoyed with his phone ringing in the middle of our sessions, or sometimes get a little angry about it, not at me, just like angry that like this was being disruptive. And um, around the time, over time, that annoyance started to dissipate, and he would just take the phone, answer it, answer the questions of his patient had or the nurse had, hang up, and we'd come back to what we were doing.
It's amazing. I love that he picked that up probably from you just sitting there like it's not a bother.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
bet no wonder he couldn't attend regular yoga classes. Someone would get very annoyed if you're in a group class and someone was talking on the phone beside you. Even if the phone was ringing, a lot of people don't always understand that. I remember having a doula in my class and she's like, I need my phone because I might get called to this birth. I was like, no problem. Yeah. I
Yeah.
had a emergency fire person in our class once. Same thing. Like they're not allowed to shut their phone off when they're on call.
Right, yeah, there are people who don't have the ability to just leave their phone
Mhm.
behind. They have to be available.
Yeah. I'm really excited that we get to ask you more questions because I feel like, oh my gosh, I have so many. We'll get to ask you more inside of pelvic health professionals and we'll get more, I'm guessing, like into like how you outline those private sessions and people who join that call can submit questions and ask you or ask you live. So that's really exciting. But if there was anything that you can think of, like what do you hear from your students of like, oh my gosh, like I'm so glad I take one-on-one yoga instead of a group class? Or is there something that you find, gosh, I'm so glad I do this instead of like this is my main focus?
Mm, yeah, something I appreciate more than ever now that I've been teaching private lessons for 5 years is how truly accessible a private yoga session can be. Now, it's not always accessible price-wise. Private sessions are more expensive. They're more of a luxury sort of item. But in terms of what we're teaching, you can truly make a yoga practice that serves that student that day in the body and the mind they are showing up with that day. Whereas if somebody goes to a studio class, a skilled teacher can offer modifications and encourage their students to have agency over their bodies and make their own choices. But at the same time, if you're going to a group class and it's labeled yin, you're going to get a yin class. And it might not be very appropriate for a student to do a vinyasa class if that's what they're craving that day in the middle of a yin class. Um, but with a private student, if their energy is low and they want to work hard, you can figure out how to give them a practice that is low to the ground. Maybe they don't get up off the floor at all. It's all supine and side lying and prone that works their hamstrings and their glutes and the abdominal muscles and gives them a sense that they were working hard. But I do find with a lot of students, there's a different feeling of working on the floor versus working standing.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of packaging what they want inside what they need. Um, and some students, uh, we talked about struggling with stillness. Some students really struggle in shavasana, and that can be a very uncomfortable or even like an anxiety um, triggering pose for people. And in a private lesson, I find that can even be more so because you don't have a group doing
Right.
it with you. And so I have a few students, and we don't end their practice with shavasana. We end it with pranayama, or we end it with a shavasana replacement, like a restorative pose, or even something slow moving meditation. Kind of gives the feeling that we're finishing the practice and we're sealing the practice, but we're not lying flat on our back with somebody watching us.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you brought this up because I know taking different training over the years, like learning, some people don't like the lights turned off, or like you said, lying flat on their back. Like we can really start to customize that class. But one last question. When you are setting your calendar, because you're really busy now, and I also love how you said that you can support your family, and especially right now in this time when your husband is building up his career, that's really great that you can do that, and that I I hope our connected yoga teachers listen to that because I know I've done it. I've had a career as a yoga teacher and been able to pay all my bills as a single mom. So it's definitely possible. I wanted to ask though about your schedule. Do you have a limit of private sessions per week?
I don't have a limit per week, but I do have a time range. So typically, I see students Tuesday through Saturday from starting at 8:15 in the morning after I've dropped my kids off at school until somewhere between 2 and 3 p.m. because I like being home. I like picking up my kids from school. I like being home to help my oldest with his homework and making dinner and being able to eat dinner with them. I do have a longer day on Fridays. On Fridays, I teach until almost 5 because that's a day my husband's typically home to be with our kids. And Saturday is a little bit shorter. I'm usually done around 1 o'clock. But that it's more about how does this fit into the day and how does this work for my family's schedule?
I love it. I also love how you're not telling me like, "Oh, I'll just book them in anytime." You have the set schedule. It works for you and your family first, and then people find that the day that works for them. I think sometimes people think, well, everyone's working and then they need evening classes. Well, maybe, but they can find those with someone else, really, if it doesn't suit your schedule. And I get it. Like I loved being able to work when my kids were at school and ran when I was teaching mainly, then that's when I made it work. I was like, well, they're in school or daycare and that's when I'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say I don't allow students to book themselves on my calendar. Most of my private students, because they see me regularly, most of my students are once a week. I have a few people who work with me every other week, and one student who works with me once a month. They are on standing appointments, but you can't go to my website and book a private session. You have to email me directly. And there's a form on my website if you're interested in private sessions that, tell me a little bit about what you're looking for. And that email goes to me. Um, but they can't book directly through me, which is partly a safety issue. I like being able to have a conversation with them first and get to know them a little bit over the phone or on a Zoom call and get a little more information about what they want to work on and their movement history, their injury history, um, but also that allows me to have a little more control over my schedule. And then because I have in person students, I travel to students and the travel times vary. So
Right.
it's a little easier for me to control my schedule that way. But I also think it's nice. I've that can filter people who aren't truly that interested in
Right.
working with you. Like they're not going to want to go through the process of like scheduling a call with you or a Zoom call and answering your questions. And I've had that happen or they're like, no, I don't want to do that. And it's like, okay, well, good
That's your
luck.
policy. That's a really great point that I love also the safety factor. And I remember like working in a physio office or working in a small yoga studio where I had a space for one on one yoga. It's really nice to know that you have people there. If you're going into someone's home or they're coming into your home, it's really important to note about safety. And then also, you want to see if it's a good fit. So I think a Zoom call is a fantastic way to do that. How do people book a class with you or check out your website? What's your website and what should they go to?
My website is www.maryredingeryoga.com, just my first and last name, yoga.com. Um, and there's a specific page for my private lessons, and there's a form you can fill out there and submit it, and that email goes directly to me. Um, you can also find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, same Mary Reddinger Yoga, and Facebook at Mary Reddinger Yoga, and we can spark a conversation there.
That's great. We'll include all of those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for taking the time to really talk through what this is like. And I'm excited that we get to ask you more questions in pelvic health professionals soon. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for all of this information, Mary, for all of your thought and time in really talking to us about how we might build a business like you have, and for really inspiring our listeners. I'm so thrilled that we get to go a little step further with this conversation and be able to ask Mary questions. So again, if you want to ask Mary questions, you can join pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Jump in there, join the call. That call is happening on March the 6th at 11 a.m. And Mary's going to talk all about creating that private one-on-one yoga business. And if you've missed that date, don't worry, there's a replay. You can still join Pelvic Health Professionals and catch the replay of that call. Also, as I said earlier in today's episode, we have another thing coming up that's live and online, and there is a replay for this also. It's a yoga series with Kathleen Pratt called Nourish Your Nervous System. It begins March the 5th and goes until April the 9th, 2024. But again, you can do this anytime with the replay if you miss it. It's a 6-week online yoga series where Kathleen is really going to share practices including yoga, mindfulness, and also bring in current research and science. There is no yoga experience required to join this class. So yes, make sure to invite your friends, especially if they are feeling stressed and overwhelmed and like they need a little nourishment for their nervous system. Kathleen offers yoga with a trauma-sensitive approach, and you will find that when you take classes with Kathleen that she really also gives choices about how you practice to really honor your own pace and your comfort level. So we're going to dig in and learn about the nervous system. We're also going to have gentle movement, breathing, and mindfulness to really help us all to reduce our stress. Sign me up. I cannot wait to do this yoga series. It is very much needed in my own life, and I feel like a lot of people's lives right now. All of the information on that yoga series will be over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And if you click on yoga, you can see that yoga series. And also in the show notes for this episode, theconnectedyogateacher.com/363. Next week on the podcast, I'm telling you this because you've listened all the way to the end of today's episode. Thank you for still being here. Next week, we are celebrating our 7-year podcast anniversary. And I can't believe it's been 7 years of putting an episode out each and every week. And I want to tell you that I am definitely going to share a bit of vulnerability next week on the podcast. I haven't written out what I'm going to say, but this is what happens when I have a solo episode coming up. I sit and think about it for a long time. And I shouldn't even say I sit and think about it. I walk and think about it. I clean and think about it. I cook and think about it. I really like to give solo episodes some time to like mull things over and check in, like how is what I'm going through or feeling as a small business owner and a yoga teacher. How is that going to help any other yoga teacher who's listening? So I hope those solos are helpful. I hear from some of you that those are your favorite episodes, and so you can always go and find one. I try and do one about every 5 episodes now, just based on your feedback of saying like, we really love these. So thank you for that support. Thank you also to our amazing team over here, Suzanne, who I've been throwing some podcasts at Suzanne kind of late for editing. She does the audio editing and makes me sound better than I actually sound. She takes out my little blips and mistakes. Crunch, thank you so much for really pulling together all of the links for the other episodes about teaching private yoga. I opened up the links that Crunch had compiled and was like, oh my gosh, look at that. It's all ready to go for listeners who want to dive in further and head over to the show notes. Crunch does an amazing job with our show notes. The timestamps are all in there, so you can click. If you go to our website, you can click around, and that's a great way. Like you might listen on the go, but if you come back to your computer at some point and you want to find something that we talked about, it's really easy to do. So head over to our website if you haven't already and check out how we organize our show notes. Also, huge thank you to Sinead, who I hope, right after I hit record on this, I hope Sinead is having a fabulous time with a friend who's coming to visit. I'm so excited for Sinead because she has been working really hard. Sinead is not only running her own yoga business, but like working for the Connected Yoga Teacher team. She also works for the OfferingTree team and has some other work that she does. And she's raising young kids and looking after her dog, Coco. And I'm just amazed. This week, I opened a project that Sinead was working on, just thought, oh my gosh, it's all done. And this makes my job easy. So I'm telling you, connected yoga teachers, these people keep the podcast going. They keep me going, especially on the tough weeks. This has been a tough week. And they've really just stepped up and said, how can we help? And it's unbelievable. I also want to say thank you to you, dear listener, for being here right to the end of the episode. You make this podcast possible. Every time you download an episode and have a listen to it and tell someone else about it, or take what you've learned and share it out into the world, this makes a big difference. If you do want to kind of wish us a happy 7th podcast anniversary next week, if you would leave us a review, that is the best gift. There is one other gift that you could give, and I'm only asking you, I should put this at the top of the episode, but here we go. It's at the very end of the episode. Someone asked me how they could support the podcast financially. And this means a lot that someone would even ask that. So I've put a button on our homepage where it says podcasts, and then right underneath it says support the podcast. It's my personal PayPal link, it's my business PayPal link. And that money is all for the podcast. So that really helps us to put these episodes together. We spend about 9 hours per episode putting them together. We don't just hit record, that's it, put it out there. We really want you to have good quality audio as much as possible, great show notes, access to amazing guests. And so we do this for you. And if you feel like you want to support the podcast so that we can keep going, or maybe you've thought, hey, Shannon, I'd like you to stop reading ads and shorten the episode a little bit. Well, if you support the podcast enough, we could also consider running the podcast without ads. So that's another option. Okay, it does make me slightly uncomfortable to do this ask. So I'm only sharing that with you because that's how it feels sometimes to put your yoga offering out there and then tell people what you're charging. I'm not saying there's a fee for the podcast. It's making me uncomfortable because up to today, it's just been out there for you free, which it still is. But if you do feel like you want to say thank you and wish us a happy 7th anniversary and give a donation to the podcast, we would be thrilled over here. Okay, I've been rambling here a little bit, it feels like, and I need to get in my final question of the episode. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?